Okay, we're at 6:02. Like I said, we're going to get started. People will keep coming in as they come in. But welcome to CAA Australasia's Demystifying Digital Field Recording panel. We're going to get started now. To start off, though, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands that CAA Australasia organisation operates on and pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. I personally am joining from Darkinjung lands, and I encourage everyone to make their own acknowledgements in the chat should you see fit. I'd like to start off by introing speakers. We've got a great set of experts to talk tonight. We're going to try and keep the talk short and the discussion long because this is a panel. This isn't a talk fest, and I'll try and keep my talk as short as possible. So the speakers in no particular order. Fritz Hardkey is from Macquarie University with expertise in rock art, especially Egypt, VR, AR and XR. Along with archaeological survey and excavation. We've got Andrea Halandoni is from Griffith Centre of Social and Cultural Research and Australian Research Centre for Human Evolution at Griffith University, with expertise again in rock art, especially Australia, Micronesia and Southeast Asia, digital archaeology and aerial archaeology. We've got Lauren Roach from Sydney University and Niche Environment and Heritage with expertise in excavation, survey and site recording, including photogrammetry, terrestrial laser scanning and LiDAR, and also a focus with Australian archaeology on rock art, mainly in the Blue Mountains and the Illawarra of Greater Sydney. Dr. Sean Ross is from Macquarie University and co-founder of Electronic Field Notebooks, or correct us with the current name, Sean, with expertise in digital archaeology, preclassical Greece, the Balkans, and the application of information technology to research. Dr. Emma Beckett is from the Centre of Rock Art and Research and Management at the University of Western Australia, with expertise in digital technologies, visualisations to enhance understanding of human interaction and modification of past landscapes. So an amazing panel. Finally, as your host, I'm Michael Rampe. I'm a CAA committee member. I'm from Pedestal 3D and Rampe Realistic Imaging, and currently an orphan from the university sector. I'm looking for a new home. But I have expertise in 3D imaging, photography, software, education, and a few other things apart from that. So, slide. Membership of CAA Australasia is free. We encourage you all to sign up. The link will be pasted. We'll come back to this a few times, so please do sign up to CAA Australasia. Also, you can follow us on social media at Discord, Blue Sky, Facebook, LinkedIn, and catch up on all of our previous panels, talks and conferences at our YouTube channel there. So what's the format tonight? Pretty simple format. So we've got a panel format where we're going to start off with five-minute hot topic talks from each of our panel members. We'd really like that as those talks go on, that you write questions in the chat so that we can get straight into questions as soon as they're finished. If you think of a question as it's going on, please drop it in the chat, and one of the committee will collate that, and we'll be able to get to it as we go through tonight. And then after that, we're going to end up with a 30-minute Q&A. So I've also got a time. I'm the timekeeper as well as the host, and I've got a wonderful chime. So when our panelists hear the chime, that means that you've got 30 seconds left, and try and wrap it up. Okay, we ready? Any nods? Good. Couple nods. Let's get started. So our first panelist is Emma Beckett. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from Wajak Noongar Boodja, where I live and sometimes work. Otherwise, there's a variety of many other countries as well that I work on. So you're going to see that I had a bit of fun with inventing words when I was putting together these slides. So I feel like for me, one of the things that really gets to me is the expectations that people have with what tech can do and can be, and I think it works both ways. So maybe the next slide there, Michael. So essentially the way I see it is it's sort of often from one extreme to another. So people are either tech phobic, so they think that they're Luddites and it's all too complicated and they can't possibly do it. It's too, technology hates me. I hear it all the time. Paper is better. I can't write in the margins. It just paper works better. It's freer. It's more flexible. And then the other extreme, which I've invented another techno-utopias. So everything's better if technology is involved. So the sort of like it just makes magic happen, so as a result there's sort of no lead in time. It's just like, well, make the technology be magic. One of my favorite pet peeves is fly a drone over it. I love drones and I love flying drones over things, but I think it goes hand in hand with the archaeology as well. The next slide there, Michael. So I guess my kind of take home from this is to kind of say to everyone that it's just another tool, or series of tools. Different skills are needed for each one. I mean, did anyone learn to drive a car by just jumping in a car and going for it? We all took lessons, got a license. So these things are skills that take time. For anything to work, it requires that sort of time investment. Digital systems aren't equal. You need planning, a good understanding of what's needed to help streamline it. And then I guess kind of on the flip side, the analog paper systems still require lots of time investment as well. So, if you do your tech right, then you really streamline those processes and it does speed up the analog ways of doing things. And I've found one thing that I've found in developing, digital recording forms for our teams is that people like input. So having that kind of iterative process where you develop a form, and you kind of workshop it and people use it in the field and they get their pet word in there. And it just, everything works better when there's that kind of backwards and forwards communication. I think, yeah. And the other thing is basically that everything is limited by the on the ground choices. So you really, you can't just go and say, fly a drone over it and find all the archaeology. You've got to have the planning before and during, to make sure that it all is all streamlined. So that's sort of my take home. And I'm not sure, I couldn't actually hear the chime, so I don't know if I
You're doing well. You've done about 4 minutes. So,
yeah, cool.
You've
All right,
definitely
good.
got some spare time. Yeah, so you're not dressed like you were in the field. Like Lauren's the only one so far. So,
Yeah.
did you bring along any special items that you always take in the field? What's your number one?
Well, I have my hat. I wasn't wearing it because I felt like that was a little bit over the top in my office. But I always take my hat. There is a drone next to me, but I didn't want to go too crazy. I always bring my drone and my phone. So yeah, I mean, it was more of a I feel like the fear is kind of what stops people going into tech, and then the expectations of magic means that the when it fails, it doesn't live up to expectations, then people get even more afraid of it. So I think that's kind of my peeve.
Look, excellent,
Hot
Emma.
topic.
Thank you so much. That's right on 5 minutes now. So excellent. Look, we'll hear from Emma again as we get into Q&A. But next up, we're going to get stuck into hot topic number 2 from Sean Ross, who's going to talk to us about FAIR principles in the field. And Sean only has one slide, so there you go.
Yeah, no, I figured any more than that, and I'd run over for sure. But no, I thought that I'd make a fairly I don't know, provocative presentation tonight, and I guess what I'm bringing into this is experience with first FAMES, the LiDAR Field Acquired Information Management Systems, which some of you'll be familiar with, and then where we supported, oh, I don't know, digitization of about 70 workflows on 40 projects over about 10 years. And then more recently, and I'd love to talk about FAMES, you can ask me about it in the Q&A, or its new incarnation, Fieldmark. We've rebuilt it all over the last few years. But The real thing I want to bring in is I've had the opportunity for the last 3 years, just concluding recently, to have a secondment at the Australian Research Data Commons, where I've worked alongside some of the leaders in research technology, in particularly like geoscience and ecology, sort of cognate disciplines or disciplines that share some of our field work problems, and to be involved with Research Data Alliance and World and Fair Impact and a few other projects and organizations. And I guess what I wanted to do is, I don't know, kind of maybe scare everybody a little bit about what's coming, particularly looking at geoscience. There's been, and I won't read every word on the slide. You've got it there for reference. There's been just this, deluge of projects looking at how to go to, you might want to call it FAIR 2.0, that although the original FAIR principles envisioned machine readable data and said that very explicitly. For most of the last 10 years or so since the FAIR principles were published, the FAIR has been human readable FAIR. And the real drive right now is to get beyond that to machine actionable FAIR data, data that can be interpreted and utilized by machines, with the ideal Platonic, the Platonic ideal of this being computable objects or FAIR digital objects as targets, objects that are self-describing and that can basically be shown to digital systems and executed in one way or another. That's still a way in the future, but what is becoming expected now routinely, and I'm thinking again geoscience and ecology, and I think it's just a matter of time before this comes to archaeology in terms of funding mandates, publication requirements, etc. Is going beyond this human readable FAIR to machine readable FAIR, machine actionable FAIR. And now, like this machine actionable data, it's table stakes. You got to go beyond that. Something that's very difficult to do if FAIR is sort of rescued or bolted on later, and really requires thought going into field data capture, whether it's digital capture or rapid digitization after, at close to the time of capture. And with this, just running through the keys for the principles: rich machine readable metadata and paradata, including your schemas, protocols, all this stuff. To the extent that you can't do this manually, it's got to be built into systems so that a lot of it's automated. All your control lists need to be this is again coming, need to be published vocabularies on a service like Research Vocabularies Australia or similar. Universal granular use of persistent identifiers. Every sample gets an IGSN. Potentially every record gets a DOI, or at least every data set within an internal identifier for each record. Explicit permissive licenses, also in robots.txt, because your audience is soon going to largely consist of large language models or whatever succeeds them. And the thing that I always found that people found the scariest at Macquarie when I was director of e-research there, got to quit it with the Excel, fair research software code, rather than GUI-based software for analysis to support reusability. And I just say this is becoming increasingly important with the kind of scrutiny that is soon going to be able to be automated by LLMs and other approaches. I point to the Replicatch project at Melbourne as an example of that sort of thing. And I think that's 10 seconds early. So,
yeah, 10 seconds. So are we going to enter a new digital dark age, or are we going to have just gone through a digital dark age? We're going to have to redo a lot of this again.
I think a lot of things aren't up to standard. And this isn't specific to archaeology. When I talk to leaders in this area in geoscience, it's everybody. I got a horror story from a geoscientist. I'll do this in like 20 seconds. Australia has tons of seismic remote sensing data, and that cost millions, tens of millions of dollars to put out the field stations and stuff like that. Like half of it's unusable because they don't have the metadata on the stations that were put out for it, and they're having to redo a bunch of it. It's this is a universal problem in field disciplines.
Thanks so much, Sean. They're really, really interesting, and I hope that elicits some questions. to talk about this. I know we had a long chat in the car about it recently. Look, great. Let's lead into our next one. We've got Lauren Roach to talk about cost versus benefit, how to sell digital field recording to skeptical clients. What a great hot topic. Over to you, Lauren.
Hi, thank you. And first and foremost, I'll just introduce that I'm joining today from the traditional lands of the Wangal people. So for today, I'm going to be donning my consulting archaeology hat. And so I think when we're discussing digital archaeology, a lot of what we're talking about on this call and what a lot of people's perception might be is a lot of this more technical, expensive technology and equipment. So I just wanted to run through that on a day-to-day basis in archaeology and particularly in consulting archaeology, often these are tools that we might be using every day. So things such as GPS, using it for locating sites, figuring out where you're going, recording the locations of new sites that you might be recording. Photography is a really key one, be it with a more expensive digital camera or even just your phone camera. Whenever you record anything, you should really be taking a photo so you know what you've done, so other people can re-find sites. So that's really key one, which also ties into de-stretch image enhancement, which some people might have heard of and worked with. Some of you may not have. If not, that third image up there is an example of de-stretch, which is a really great image enhancement tool when recording rock art in the field. GIS is another key one that you use day to day. So it can be really helpful if you know how to do some GIS programming, even just basic shapefiles, but also using it in the field as well. A lot of site recording these days is done on mobile site recording apps, which often require you to use basic GIS input to record new sites, to figure out where you're going. So is another really key one that you use in the day-to-day. And also the use of total stations for getting complex geospatial information on excavations. So some of these, for any people maybe newer in their careers, don't freak out when you hear digital archaeology. It's really part of the day-to-day of what we do. But next slide, please, Michael. I'm now going to talk a little bit about my hot topic, which is how do we then convince clients to use the more complicated and expensive digital archaeology tools, particularly in consulting circumstances where you're working with paying clients. So one of the key ways to convince them is a lot of regulators are now asking for the increased use of digital recording techniques. So things like photogrammetry, LiDAR, terrestrial laser scanning, the use of drones, ground penetrating radar. Often regulators are asking for this. So I do a lot of work in New South Wales. The main regulatory body of Heritage New South Wales has been asking a lot of our clients to do 3D modelling of sites, particularly for clients that might be involved with mining or large-scale development processes, which could have the potential to lead to impacts to sites. So making sure that you get that digital record is now something that's actually part of that regulatory process in a lot of cases, which then ties into my next point that digital recording now aligns with best practice recording techniques, not only in Australia, but also globally. And I think when you frame it that way to clients that, yes, these basic tools are part of our everyday, but a lot of these more complicated and more expensive tools are actually now starting to be required. That may also help to convince them, which ties into my third main point, which I think is a great way to convince clients, which is leading on from those last ones, that doing this high quality digital recording contributes to a more positive public perception of companies. So particularly companies that might be involved in mining, large-scale infrastructure projects that might be a bit concerned about their public reputation. This can be a great way to convince them. And I think, you know, a lot of clients that we work with are really great people, and I think they really want to build positive relationships with community, particularly when you're working with cultural sites and local Aboriginal communities. And I think if you can remind your clients of that, then they're often more inclined to spend that little bit of extra money early on rather than hitting any snags down the line. So I think I'm fairly close to 5 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks, Michael.
Look, excellent. Wow, yeah. really interesting, and all of these as the arguments when you've still got a construction company that doesn't want any digital recording. I think it's an interesting tension that we'll all live through at some stage in our careers. And the simple fact that whatever you record in the field should be looked at as a new artifact. And this is the one thing that we don't know who's going to look at that photo in 10 years' time and get actual value from it. So I think it's key to do whatever we can, let alone whether the client's going to pay for it or not. But yeah, certainly the more expensive ones, I think you've made some compelling cases to be able to argue for those. Look, excellent. Next up, we've got Andrea Halandoni to talk about digital recording in remote areas. Over to you, Andrea.
First, I'd like to acknowledge I'm speaking from the land of the Mirror people. And Michael, this is what I wear in the field sometimes. And I went the other way and I made my slide very complicated. So maybe you can click 3 times, Michael. And yep, see, so I'm showing. There you go, stop there. We have to fly. When I was thinking about what remote areas are, because that's changing, right? Like I'm working up in West Arnhem Land right now, and I don't consider it that remote, at least not compared to some of the places I work in the Pacific. So to get to Ifalik, we had to fly from Brisbane to Manila or Japan, fly to Guam, and those flights are still regular. And then there are 2 flights a week to Yap. And when you get to Guam, it is, I'm going to call that semi-remote. Like you don't have a certain drone battery, good luck. You probably won't find, unless you know somebody who has the same drone and can borrow from them. You can't just walk into a shop and buy another DJI battery. We luckily found someone with a sat phone because we realized we didn't bring one and we had to go to these places. So we rented a sat phone from a friend for a week. So you get the app, again, twice a week, you have the chance to go there. And then it's 3 days on a fishing boat to Ifalik. So this is, for me, what I still consider remote field work. And this was, we spent 3 days getting there, 3 days getting back, and 1 week on this island. Next slide, please. So what I had to do there was, well, initially it was to fly a drone, and to fly the drone, I would have to charge the batteries. So I had to, there was no electricity on this island. I had to come up with a power system. So I didn't really know much about this at the time. Someone gave me a textbook for photovoltaics. I read it, and then I was able to build a system, pack it all up, ship it to Yap so it gets there by the time we get there. And then, because you can't take this stuff on the plane, and a deep cycle battery and all that stuff, and then set it up on this island. Next slide, please. And these are a few things we learned. One is to evaluate your power needs, of course, way in advance. Like even in this case, trying to evaluate them on Guam would have been too late. We had to evaluate that even from Australia and have things sent to Guam from mainland US. Another thing we learned here was, this was not my problem, this was somebody else's, because they were measuring, doing water measurements, and they thought, oh, this new professor has this fancy new device, which is the upgrade of our current one. Let's borrow those and take them. And they borrowed them, but they didn't update the firmware and the software. And we're on an island where there is no internet anywhere nearby. Now you might think, well, nowadays there's Starlink, we could have taken that. But this was a very small budget project. Like this was 10 years ago, and it was maybe less than $10,000 to fly everyone to Yap from Guam, to rent the fishing boat to take us there, to buy all the supplies. It was a very small budget project. We wouldn't, even today, if we had this, we wouldn't have been able to afford Starlink. Bring enough food and water, because I know this doesn't sound like a digital thing, but it was essential at the time. Like I was criticized when I was on Yap, getting all this canned goods. And so one of our teammates was like, I'm just going to eat the fresh fish on the island. We get to the island and there's a fishing taboo because someone's passed away. And the whole week we didn't have fresh fish. So if we didn't have the canned goods, we'd have been eating their food, which they may not be so happy about. They get supplied twice a year. So it's a very remote place. Following locals is always a good idea anywhere you work, but particularly in these places, because they know, they pretty much know where there's a hole in the ground that you might fall into with your gear and, break it. Sometimes I just give it to the locals to do it, since they know their way around so well. They can, when I'm geoslamming like an area that's very slippery, and they just walk around holding a coffee in one hand and a scanner in the other, and they just walk through it like it's nothing. Battery and baggage restrictions, especially when you're flying. Some airlines can be very strict and can check every wattage of your battery, and even if it's worn off, they may not accept it or allow you to bring it. One of the first things I did when and I had an RA was have him make a spreadsheet of all the equipment and how much it weighed, and so that I could plan my baggage, so that I could max out on the 23, if I had 23 kilos per baggage, or if I had 32. And be prepared to lose or damage your equipment. Now, this is something I'm only learning late in life. At the time, we didn't end up bringing this drone because I was afraid to lose it. We were at the Guam airport, and we were going to check it in, and it was going to cost maybe an extra $200 to bring this drone because it was oversized and overweight and everything. And well, in fairness, a lot of things had gone wrong with this drone at this point, and I was just like, okay, let's just leave it. But now I regret it because we actually never used this drone again for any other project, and it got out of date so quickly. This was before. Might have been the time of the Phantom 1 or 2, which those Phantoms were not great. This was much better drone at that time, and I regret not bringing it now, because if we had crashed it, so what? We never used it anyways for anything else. Have a contingency plan. For your contingency plan, I'm always thinking about, well, what if this gear fails? What can I do? And if that gear fails, what's the backup for that one? Until the point where it's like, well, then we just can't do it. So I think always thinking about those things before you get to remote field work is what you do, because it might mean just bringing one little thing extra. An example is, I didn't realize we were using these, just the distance measurers. We only had one. I think if we had two, when the one fell into the ocean, we could have continued on. But no, luckily that happened towards the very end. And then we just started measuring them, like doing our measurements with tape measure. But I was thinking, this is a $30 distance measure. I think we could have afforded just one more and brought a little less canned tuna. I don't know. And
Look,
now take your safety.
I'm gonna cut you there, Andrea. That's
amazing.
Okay. Amazing.
Okay, let's cut there. That's fine.
Wow. I'm sure we can all feel wow for that. Like, I freak out if I don't have the internet for 2 hours. So, I get it. Doing field work there, and this is your closing slide of some of the amazing people you work with over there. Look, I hope I've got a lot of questions to ask that I'm going to save for the Q&A time. So let's get to that after one more hot topic, which is Fritz. So Fritz is going to tell us about fast and lightweight. And portable databases in the field. Over to you, Fritz.
Thanks, mate. I'm talking today from the land of the Wallumattagal people. Fast and lightweight. So I'm just going to be using the use case here of Egyptian rock art sites that I've been working at. Next slide. So basically where I work is 800 km south of Cairo in Upper Egypt. It's a collaboration between Macquarie and the Brussels Museum of Art and History. We survey and analyze rock art in an area called El Hosh in Upper Egypt. We started in 2019. And one interesting part of this is that this area has been investigated before over more than 100 years by other researchers, other travelers who documented this site in various ways. There are photos available, sketches, field notes, but all taking their own little perspective and all only covering a small fraction of what's actually there. Nonetheless, very valuable material because some of the rock art is destroyed, so we can backfill and, I guess, fill gaps in areas where quarries have been built and where rock has been excavated and that rock art no longer exists. Being in Upper Egypt, and I guess I shouldn't be coming across as too precious here about heat, because a lot of our colleagues here are working in Australia where it gets very hot, but we're dealing with sort of mid-40s Celsius in the wrong time of the year. And we have in Egypt a situation where when we conduct field work, we have the local representatives of the Ministry of Antiquities who accompany us, and they do not work past 1:30 p.m. So we need to be able to fit in the work between sunrise and, just after midday. So the project basically is a small team. We have, short days, 5 hours because of the heat, like I said, with maximum coverage. A lot of it is rescue based because there is a lot of disturbance going on. We tend to walk far and walk quickly. We have lightweight equipment, mirrorless cameras. We share lenses. We use tablets in the field. There's no computers that we take along. They're more rugged, lighter. Um, we use high resolution where we can, so APS-C and full frame cameras. We do 360 panoramas, photogrammetry, and RTI in terms of the capture techniques there that we use. The techniques, so 360 virtual tours are created using 3D Vista software. As I say, we do 3D capture and D-stretch as well. Everyone's familiar with Agisoft Metashape software. We do digital tracing as well using iPads. So in Egypt, you can't actually put clear plastic over rock art to do tracing. So we need to do digital tracing with iPads or other devices, and we do ortho images, which are then traced on the Apple iPad using an app called Graphic. What I wanted to talk to you about more specifically, though, is that we use a portable database. In our work, we like to be very flexible. We sometimes go into areas where we do not understand before going in what the typology is of the rock art. We come across things which are not known from other areas sometimes, and we have a need for databases to be quite flexible and be able to add attributes on the go, basically. So what we currently use is this Android, and it's also available as a desktop, this database, very lightweight database called Memento. And we will walk out into the field. Each of us will have a tablet, and where we work currently, and this is not always the case, we will have cellular connection with a local phone network. So the Memento database, when you run on different devices, is able to sync across devices, which is really handy. So I will literally be in one part of the site, and another person will be on the other part of the site, and I will see their entries coming up in my database. So it's great that can integrate straight away. If we don't have the cellular contact, we can integrate back at the base camp. We use tablets, which are ideally 7 to 8 inch. We want to hold them in one hand. Just on a legacy data bit, an interesting anecdote is that some of the earlier researchers from the 30s and 20s used notebooks, and they particularly said they wanted to have things which can be held in one hand so they can look and write at the same time. Well, we're now using tablets instead of notebooks. And we can also link via local Wi-Fi. So there's a screen capture from this Memento database. You'll have there on the left-hand side the locality number. We use a year and number, the year followed by the occurrence number, and just the various attributes there. And this Memento database can take in the locality from the tablet itself. So the latitude and longitude is sucked in. You can put images. We need to add other things in there, such as whether we know this from legacy data, this site, and be able to record that this legacy site has been actually rediscovered and that we found it again, and that sort of thing. So it's a very flexible and easy way to use a database in the field. And I think I'm up to 5 minutes now.
Well, excellent. Look, thanks so much, Fritz. That's amazing and flexible way to do it in the field. Look, that's our 5 hot topics. So, wow, what a breadth of what we've got. So we're going to switch gears now and move into open questions. I might kick it off just with a really sort of simple question. I'll open this up to everyone in the panel. How much data is too much data when you're in the field? I know, Sean, we had an instance where we took 27,000 photographs of a certain archaeology site, and I would call that too much data. But like, where should you stop? Where should you start?
The problem is we only knew that was too much data after the fact. Going in, in retrospect, it was more than necessary. I think you learn it. You get a sense from experience, and I still, even after all my time in the field, err on the side of too much, a lot. You can always call, you can't always get more.
And you can't go back, right? Usually. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I would say as much as storage as you have is where too much hits. So recently, just starting to get my head across the multispectral drone, the amount of the size of those captures, suddenly I was hitting a terabyte for a few days of data storage, and then I was starting to hit the amount of capacity of my computer and the amount of capacity that I had with the external hard drives. Now I have bigger ones, but so yeah, that's what I'd say.
I guess another thing to think about is, we probably all take, JPEGs and RAW, but there's definitely circumstances where you don't need raw images. Like, if you're recording say a rock art site, you generally want an overview picture of the site itself, where where the rock wall is and where this particular feature is, and the other thing over here. You might not need a raw image for that. So there's times where you can apply some discretion to that and think about where raw is needed and where JPEG's probably good enough. Because in the end, you need to run through that stuff when you get back home and process it. So there's all the processing time of too much data, which weighs you down as well.
Okay, anyone else want to add anything? So I've got a question from the audience, and if you're in the audience, please do realize you can raise your hand and you can unmute your mic and ask a question. I'll call on you, or you could drop it in the chat as well. But there's a question from Simon. How do you incorporate care? So collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility and ethics alongside FAIR principles. And I think I'll throw this to Sean to start with.
Yeah, I just in case I forgot, I put it in the chat as well. That I think a common misconception is that fair data equals open data, and fair data doesn't necessarily equal open data. Even in my own work in Bulgaria, where we don't have the concerns that that one would have in Australia, New Zealand, other Canada, the US with indigenous group, there's still sensitivity around, for example, the location of burial mounds, because looting is a major problem, and you can, even with major archaeological data publication services like Open Context, you can obfuscate things, and in that case it would be location, but that you can set up protocols for access to the data, and you don't have to expose it all. You can expose subsets of it. You can control access. There's a number of things that you can do, and the other thing that I'd add to that, I had the opportunity at the ARDC, Australian Research Data Commons, where I was working on a very esoteric thing, a persistent identifier for research projects. This is one of the areas that we were exploring with local contexts, in particular the organization that I linked to in the chat, that they offer us a support for documenting the agreements that you have, the working arrangement that you have, the projects that you have with indigenous groups, and tying that into things like a persistent identifier for the project, so that they're permanently and linked in a stable way, so that this documentation can travel with all of the data on your project, no matter where it ends up going, samples, data, other things. And this is why I one of the things, it's again very esoteric, but that persistent identifiers seem like this strange thing, but they're actually quite powerful when they're deployed in ways like this.
No, thanks, Sean. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll jump into another question. So this is from Kate. And it's for Emma and Lauren, but it's for all panelists. Do you still combine analog and digital recording methods? I find I like to have paper in case the files, GPS photos don't save, or there's tech issues, but some people seem fully digital.
Yeah, I definitely still combine both. And I think that sort of ties into Andrea's point about always have a backup plan for your backup plan. Especially in just day-to-day consulting, specifically with survey work. As I mentioned, we're often using mobile recording apps based in GIS systems. Things can go wrong, things sometimes don't save. So I'll always make sure photos are also backed up just in my phone camera roll, as well as uploaded straight to the online system. I'll take points in my handheld GPS as well as on the immediate mobile-based system. And then, yeah, I'll often write down notes on bits of paper as well, as a just in case. But again, definitely comes down to what it is that you're doing. You can't use paper for things like photogrammetry or anything like that. But certainly for just normal fieldwork data collection, I absolutely like to keep my options open and have a backup.
Emma.
I'm fully digital in terms of my recording. In with regards to team members, so I would say for the team, it depends how receptive people are. So usually, if I explain to them that they have to do a lot of data entry afterwards and quickly, then they're more receptive. And in terms of the fear, that's totally understandable. I get that. So we do daily backups, and we do daily backups in multiple locations. So we make sure that we have a copy of everything in three places always. So that way, I think in some instances, I've heard stories about people setting fire to old field notes on paper and things like that. So I think in some instances, so long as you back it up and you've tested it before you go, and we have multiple devices as well. So if one device fails, then you've got everything on a different device digitally. So yeah, that's kind of how I would avoid the anxiety of worrying about losing data.
Sean, I'll throw it to you in a second, but I was going to say, I always have a clipboard whenever I work, because I'm doing so much digital that having something to jot down notes and take measurements and, throw away things or even write something to hold up in front of the camera is, so I think they work hand in hand as well. So Sean, you had your hand up.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I admitting that I do also carry a notebook for longer form reflections that I don't necessarily want to try to force into a form. I would say that, and I promise I won't turn this into an advertisement for Fieldmark or anything, but this is where I think one of the things we need to do as a community is emphasize the use of software applications that are designed for research that accommodate this kind of thing, rather than going to mass market products that are not designed and forcing ourselves to do all of these workarounds. A system, and again, I know Fieldmark best, so I'm going to do that, but this is something that I'm pretty sure that you could probably set up in QField and other field specific software as well, where you automatically make multiple copies of everything, because everything is getting copied to is synced across a bunch of devices. That, like, when we designed Fieldmark, we've got about 6 different ways we can get the data off your device, and like if you have 5 devices in the field, if one survives, even if there's a download error or something like that, we could probably get it off. And this is again, I use this as an example of well-designed field systems that are built for the rigors of field work, and for, there's an entire body of literature on kinetic data recording in, during field work. There's such an advantage over trying to use commercial off-the-shelf software for field work.
Excellent. I'm going to throw in a sideways question, and it's going to go back to my how much data is too much data. How long do you save data for? How long do all of you save data for? Do you delete data? How do you feel when you delete data? I mean, I'm sitting on 100 terabytes of raw photos, and I still do shoot everything raw. But how does everyone manage this or mitigate this? As we increase our acquisition of data, like you said, Emma, 1 terabyte in 2 days, that becomes a very big year, and that's accelerating. What do you do about deleting? What do you do about getting rid of data? How does it make you feel? Anyway.
Very anxious.
It's a sinking feeling.
Yeah.
Why?
Because you think you might have stuffed up.
Yeah.
Mm.
But I mean, the one that's come up to me recently, and I've spoken to a lot of people about, is the unknown. Like, what could the data be used for? And And I remember like we had a photogrammetry panel recently, and I got asked the question, should I save all the raw photos? And I believe I said, like, if you process at the best quality you can possibly do, there's no necessarily reason because it's not going to get better in the future. And then Gaussian splatting came along, something totally different, unknown, off the horizon that I didn't know was coming. And all of a sudden, that 100 terabytes of photos I'm sitting on have a very different use, which is a reprocessing as, Gaussian splat models. And I know Sean, similar thing with large language models, like how. So this came up. There was a really good talk about at the Auckland CAA conference, the international conference, on how we actually mitigate this and what we do.
I mean, the great thing about the university is we just keep requesting more storage space. So that's my technique at the moment, and I don't know that that's the best. It's probably a limit to that. So yeah, but yeah, I have real anxiety about deleting things.
Okay, sorry, that was just a side one from me, but I'll jump back into a question from Corey. So this is tied into Simon's question regarding fair and care. How is everyone planning to manage data for long-term storage and accessibility? Any suggestions for systems to make various digital data types into a more coherent system instead of piecemeal bits? Maybe data lake or something. Anyone?
Well, I guess I'd ask what you're wanting to do with the data, in the sense that if you want to put it in some place where it's published, and you want if you want to publish it for like research use, then a domain-specific repository is probably the way to go. But if you've got other uses in mind, like public outreach or something like that, then it would require other methods of getting it out. And I guess the key to accessing all of those is having your data, clean and well formed, so that it can then be sent, exported, put in different places for different audiences.
Should we chip it onto stone tablets? I mean, all data is ephemeral. Like what's lasted 3,000 years in archaeology, if you actually look at it. And this is, I mean, I've seen in the chat some people saying, don't trust universities, don't trust hard drives, don't trust this. But it's all digital data. Will be in a similar format. There's no permanent solution to store digital data. And more that we do with the cloud, I think they're more and more semi-permanent. The cloud isn't some magical place. It's just computers with hard drives. That's what we're dealing with more and more now. But Sean, I think it's a pretty bold statement to say you've never deleted data. I'd like to say.
I don't think I have, not intentionally anyway. But I mean, a field season from 10 years ago, we'd be lucky to produce 50 gigabytes of data, because we weren't doing photogrammetry and the camera images weren't that big. So, and what's 50 gigabytes of data is nothing. Why would I get rid of any of it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'm the same. I mean, the technology's changed that. With things like new Compact Flash Express, I can copy data quicker, which means I can shoot more data in a day, which means I can keep more data. And yeah, your terabytes a year that you're talking about, Emma, go up, and they're going up. So we're in this schism where we're generating more and more. So that question of how much is too much is still, I think, a really interesting question on conservation. And I've just seen someone, Jackie, in the chat speaking about the power usage and the environmental footprint of saving everything. So there's a really interesting discussion around that.
The other issue are the file formats and where they're going, and especially for RAW, where you have RAW for specific manufacturers, and even TIFF and JPEG, and when they upscale their versions, and the loss of detail potentially going from one to the other. It's a big issue. It's a bigger issue than archaeology.
Okay,
This is where good repositories help, because they will migrate data formats as necessary and rewrite data to combat bit rot and stuff like this.
One would hope that happens. I'm always shocked at how much information I get from. I spoke earlier about legacy data, how there's photographic prints and field notes from 100 years ago, and they're mostly in good condition. I'd like to see our stuff in 100 years.
Yeah, and the human power that's involved in getting it from one place to another, even if it's still in a readable file format, never mind if it's, kind of a legacy file format that is really difficult to access. It's a phenomenal amount of work that's involved in getting data from one place to another, if it's not in, the same structure or just all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something you said, Andrea, on more and more disposability of equipment, and I think you spoke about it as early in your career, drones were really expensive, so therefore you're careful with them and you didn't want to do anything. Whereas now, as soon as you take it out of the box, even if you don't take off with it, it's lost half its value, and a few weeks later, it's lost half its value again, and then a brand new version comes out and it's got no value. How do we manage that? What's the go-to equipment that isn't changing? And how much is disposable equipment something that we just need to realize is the way it is now?
Is that just for me or for everybody?
No, it's for everybody, but it was picking up on that bit you said about that. I flew a Phantom one with a GoPro. I screwed in myself and did all of,
yeah,
I've been there.
it wasn't the best. Yeah, I guess it really depends, right? As also what access you have. If you have access to, you think, more grants to get more gear, then you can be a little more daring with it. If it's the only thing you're going to have for a long, long time, you have to be a bit more careful. SLR cameras, I find, are lasting really long now. Maybe you want to switch to mirrorless here for this big project I'm on now, whether to go mirrorless or not. And I decided, you know what, it didn't save that much weight. It would mean spending money on this where I could spend money on something else. So even things like I thought about upgrading my iPad. I'm on an M2. Should I have gotten the M4 for the kind of work I'm doing? But, I also figured the M2 should be fine for this. And, I'll upgrade to the M4 and my M2 dies. But drones, I'm finding, I'm less and less precious with them as time goes on. I mean, how I was with the first drones I flew compared to how I am now when, they're getting cheaper, they're getting better. And it's kind of like cell phones. I was just having a chat with someone about how, you don't change your cell phone very often, like for 5 years, but now that the updates of the phones are becoming so good that you don't want to not change it, after 2 years because the camera is so good and all that. So I think that's also happening with a lot of the gear. That said, there's some gear which is like, I find like the BLK 360 is such a great scanner. The upgrade of that isn't, I think, better for what I'm trying to do. But so I was using that for 7 years and I just lost mine recently and I'm grieving. But you have to move on, have to try with the new one now that the Gen 1 of the BLK 360 is no longer being made.
Yeah, I've got 2 drones on the shelves behind me right here that I keep registered, but they're back up and they haven't flown for years. It's every year or two I'll buy a new drone, and they're just getting so much better. And and they're inexpensive relatively compared to the flights and the amount you spend on actually living through the research you do. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll pull out another one. If there is questions from all the wonderful people here, please do. But I've got 2 last ones that I think we can tease out as a panel. What's your most common, whoops, I forgot that again, mistake in the field when it comes to digital data?
I can start that one off with a pretty bad one. One time I had about a half-hour bushwalk into a site that I was supposed to be doing a baseline recording of, got to the site and realized I'd forgotten my DSLR camera.
Yeah.
And I had to walk all the way back to the car, grab the camera and walk all the way back out. So, I think that's a kind of need your camera to be able to take the photos. So that was a pretty big oops. Haven't repeated that one since yet.
My most frequent and most frustrating is forgetting to update the software. And then you get out there and things are not talking to each other. Thank goodness for I mean, dare I say, thank goodness for Starlink, but it's really saved me a few times.
Not so much digital, but forgetting a scale when you're photographing some rock art and you have to put a penknife or a pencil there.
Yep. The amount of scale bars we've made in the field. Again, I was showing it earlier. This is my favorite. I never forget anymore. I made this out of a piece of wood, which is my 1 meter scale bar that's seen in so many sites, but I never forget my scale anymore. But yeah, scale was a good one, especially with photogrammetry, where it's very, very difficult. I did some on some caves in China with wonderful Kira Westaway, and we ended up using her rock hammer. Your classic geologist rock hammer, because it was a very set size, and we used that as our scale bar because there was no scale bar. So yeah, it's an interesting.
It's amazing how creative you get with the scale. Lighter.
Correct.
Pen.
Yeah. You start looking for things and go, "Hey, can I measure that later?" Yeah, interesting. Anyone else? Okay, I've got a new question from the field. So from Sven, how long before we can do everything on a smartphone, facilitating participation by rangers, local communities, youth, and the like? So I think this is the opposite question to high-end tech being disposable. How much is high-end tech now redundant with low-end tech? Sorry to interpret that one, Sven, if I've got it wrong, but
I guess I'd want to hear what you expect from to me, like everything to mean. I think we could do a lot. I think that, and again, reading into this question, I hope not too much, community heritage, citizen science things, there's tons that you can do. And despite and those of you who know me will know that I think AI is great, machine learning is great, LLMs are wonderful. There are still things that people are better at, and and the last couple of papers that I've published have been on this about things that it's better to get people to do in this sort of community heritage or crowdsourcing or whatever you want to call it way.
So, Sven's clarified. I think you can get a pretty good location on your phone, about 5 meter accuracy. Pictures, not quite yet, at least not for rock art. You can laser scan with a phone, but it's probably not as good as a scanner. Recording oral history, you can definitely do that on your phone. In fact, I enjoy doing it with my Meta glasses these days. It's less intrusive. You just turn it on right away as soon as they start talking. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add on, from the photogrammetry point of view, that photogrammetry is about mastering optics. And although, mobile phones can make really nice pictures now, they're not mastering technical optics. So when you actually look at, the lens profile curves and stuff like that of more higher end gear, it's not that you can't scan sites with a phone, but if you want to do it to be repeatable and do it at a higher end level, I think higher end optics still make sense. So I think there's a mid ground as well, and I really like the fact, Sven, you've teased out that it's those kind of general things. Absolutely, I think incredible what cheap phones are doing now and cheap cameras are doing now. Just incredible. You go back 10 years, what we had, not even close to what the cameras are now, and that's just going to keep repeating. So I think the answer is yes. It's getting more and more accessible, but at the same time, there's an arms race going on. So laser scanning is getting better, aerial LiDAR is getting better. We can do more and more stuff at the high end with more and more fidelity and answer more and more questions. So I guess it's about repeating what we do now or repeating what we're going to do. I guess.
Yeah, I agree totally. And we use the quick and dirty scanning on the phone quite a lot, but it doesn't replace. If you want to do it properly, you need to do it properly. But if you want something that you can do in a minute, and then because you've got to dash over somewhere else, then it's better than nothing.
And it depends on the application, what you're using that data for. If it's something more detailed needed, or you can live with a low fidelity 3D model. for a particular application to show somebody something quickly, or and it's also a good backup, in case something else fails. If you're doing your full photogrammetry and it doesn't work out in your AGSoft.
Yeah. Look, I agree wholeheartedly. Look, we're right on an hour, and we always have a bit of extra time anyway. But I thought I'd okay, one more question from the panel from the chat. So Stephen has asked, how open should field data be? Being able to access site data online is great for researchers, but how much access should the public have to survey excavation data, considering things like looting? I know a few of you have responses to this.
I can jump in. I think it's a very key consideration, particularly when you're working with First Nations people in Australia. You've got to be really careful with what data should be made accessible to the public. And I think in Australia, that should absolutely be a conversation that you're always including First Nations people in. Do they want their cultural sites to be publicly accessible? And a lot of the time, I think you'll find that answer is no for a lot of groups. So I would say that's a pretty major concern. And for the most part, not all levels of your fieldwork data should be made public and accessible, particularly things like locations and any photos, images, 3D models of any sensitive cultural information. That should all be kept private, I would say.
Yeah, no,
I think it's also this concept of a need-to-know basis, what the public finds interesting and useful, what's versus what is useful to the researcher, and there's this level of the data that is not necessary to be made public, right?
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to take the contrary position and emphasize the as open as possible, particularly in the case of publicly funded research, should be open unless there's a compelling reason not to. Which doesn't mean that that I'm downplaying cultural sensitivity. If an Indigenous group decides that certain data shouldn't be open, I'm not trying to contravene that, but I'm just saying that it should be I guess, hard conversation, that there are costs to keeping data closed. A number, like both sort of fiscal financial sort of costs of research being redone later because the data is not there, whatever, but also lost research opportunities, comparative synthetic research that can't be done because of data being missing. So I guess that maybe I'm getting old-fashioned these days, but I would still argue for the default to be open.
To jump on Sean's point there, I think that it should be, as he said, because it's public money, we really need to consider publishing a lot of our data whenever we can, sharing it whenever we can, and if we're allowed to, of course. But that should be a priority for most researchers. We have to understand we're getting paid by the public to do this research, and it should be shared when we can.
Okay,
Yep.
so a good example would be, and I think this applies to Egypt as well as Australia, providing exact locations of, say, rock art in your publication. Is that something that you do?
No, and that one, Fred, I think even without cultural sensitivities, there's a public safety. And I think that was the key of the question, thinking about looting. The one I've got, when we scanned Macquarie Lighthouse years ago, and we ended up on the news with a puff piece with the cliffside wartime entrance that we discovered, which we never discovered. All these people started abseiling down, and the council was up in arms over the fact that all these people wanted to go to this place. But we also found the shaft entrance at the top using GPR, and we had to balk the data. We had to actually what we published was in the wrong place on purpose, because we didn't want people going and digging there. There was something that you would have just dug into a 50-meter open shaft. So there's, I think you've got to think about it beyond the cultural, which are incredibly important with a lot of the sites we work on. There's that public safety one. There's that, or the looting one that I think you're talking about if you're trying to find something valuable.
Where I work, there's no cultural sensitivity really to consider, but there's a lot of amateur archaeologists that would like to go and see these places for themselves.
Yeah.
So, that's not publishing data, right? That's not telling people where something is exactly. and it could be useful from a research perspective. Of course, we need to know where things are, but that's limiting the data that we're outputting, right, to protect these sites.
Emma.
Yeah, we had issues with, sites being graffitied and damaged by nearby, miners at nearby mine sites. So, they ended up like blocking off the road essentially to stop. So the information wasn't public per se, but it was kind of word of mouth. So really stopping access, to get to those places really, that basically there was no damage after they blocked it off, and then the track kind of disappeared. So I think, unfortunately, people are a problem. So publishing, you really need to work out how to manage that people disturbing things problem.
Yeah. I guess again I'm going to throw in on the other side. So Bulgaria, yes, looting has been a huge problem there for a long time, and we work closely with the local museums and the archaeological service in Bulgaria, but that they eventually made the decision that most of the burial mounds are the principal feature. There are tens of thousands of them. They're absolutely crucial to sort of understanding mortuary landscapes and other aspects of Bulgarian heritage archaeology. And the reality is, what found was that if you put barriers up to the access to your data, that researchers generally won't, many won't jump through the hoops to get it. It's, when the friction becomes too high, the data is essentially not available. And over time, or it is not in practical terms reused or put to any purpose. Over time, the decision was made by the archaeological service there that at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences that 90 odd% of these mounds had already been looted. Most of them you can see from from a road, from a village, that they're not exactly hidden in the way that, say, rock art might be in a remote area. And they eventually made the decision, collectively, on the Bulgarian side to release this, to make this data publicly available. And I think this is what I mean, that it should be a more sort of nuanced risk assessment, understanding that there are risks and costs to keeping the data, closed as well.
Yeah, look, I'm going to start to wind it up. We're starting to get a few people drop off, and we're getting close to time. I'm sure we could all go all evening. This is such a great conversation where we've ended up tonight. I did just want to firstly thank all of our panelists for tonight. Wow, what a superstar set of panelists. If I could have one statement each, and this is the last question I'll give to all five of you, is what's your advice or number one tip for someone just starting out, considering that we possibly have a lot of archaeology students here in the room?
I'll kick it off. As someone who has recently been in that position, I'm still fairly early in my career. I think, as I mentioned, trying to master some of those basics first before you begin overcomplicating things is a really great first step, I think. That would be my advice. Start with the basics, get to know them, and then play around with starting to experiment with some of those more expensive pieces of tech and see what you can do.
Yeah, I think that's good. If I can just hook on to Lauren there, I agree. Do baby steps, which is also related to having a think about what you need in the first instance. So looking at your requirements, and then I'll extend that and say that you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money on equipment that you can use, like I was talking about before, cheaper types of databases, cheap tablets, and as for your field recording, even some photographic equipment you can buy secondhand. These days you can get Sony A7s secondhand that are in good condition because somebody wanted to upgrade. You don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money to get relatively good quality recording.
Great.
Yeah.
Emma?
I agree with all that. And I'd say also, don't panic and it's like a skill like any other. So, it'll take time to master it. So yeah, as Lauren said, start slowly and yeah, just get into it.
Sean?
I'd say become a producer, not just a consumer of digital things. Take a software carpentries class, learn some programming, learn enough programming to intelligently interact with large language model coding assistants, then learn to use them so that you can, set up your own systems, do your own things, not be take advantage of open source ecosystems that are out there and not be entirely at the mercy of commercial off-the-shelf software.
Andrea?
As I think photogrammetry is something every digital archaeologist should know. Learn to use a camera, learn how to use it manually, learn every part of it. And after that, learn to use a tripod.
And after that, take a scale bar. Definitely. Look, what a wonderful panel. Last thing I wanted to talk about is we have a conference very soon. So we're having an online conference this year, CAA Australasia. It's our third online conference. The call for papers is out now. We've got 15-minute papers. We've got 5-minute lightning talks. It closes on the 11th of August. So if you got to do two things after tonight's thing, number one, join CAA. If you're not part of CAA Australasia already, it is free. And number two, submit a paper or a lightning talk. We've really tried to format this conference for everyone. We're really looking forward to it. If you've ever been to a CAA conference, either international or chapter based, they're just like what we did tonight, but on a much bigger scale. So, I mean, if this panel tickled your fancy, you're going to love that. So, that's that. And, if you sign up to CAA, you'll be getting more and more mailing lists from us about the conference over time, and you'll hear about it as we go. So, look, we're right on 7:14 now. We're right at time. Like, it was amazing. So, I'd like to thank everyone for contributing, and all the people contributing behind the scenes as well. We've had quite a few CAA committee members like our wonderful leader Alex and Simon behind the scenes helping with this as it's went on. So I'd like to thank all my colleagues as well in the CAA committee, the CAA Australasia committee. Okay, signing out. That's it from your host. Thank you, everyone.